to be mined. And this costs a lot of money and resources as well.
Now, what about the impact on birds and bats? I mean, it sounds to me like these turbine blades whizzing around at 100 miles an hour at the tip of the blade, that could be a risk, don't you think?
Yes, definitely. And if we look at just the United States, between 140,000 and 500,000 birds are estimated to be killed by wind turbines every year. And the number of bats is estimated to be 888,000 killed every year in the U.S. This will result in billions of extra mosquitoes because bats are essential in keeping mosquitoes and crop-damaging insect populations in check.
Now it's interesting. Why are bats killed at such a high frequency? That sounds like it's more even than birds.
Yes. Well, in fact, in Canada, there's about 47,400 bats estimated to be killed every year by wind turbines. And this is predicted to increase about a 3.5-fold as more wind turbines are installed over the next 10 years. And the reason why bats are more susceptible to these problems is because when they fly near the wind turbines, there is a drop in nearby air pressure, and it can burst the blood vessels in a bat's lungs if they fly too close. Bats are very sensitive to this pressure drop, more so than birds. So about twice as many bats are killed by wind turbines as birds.
Yeah, it's interesting. When we had what was his name? Mr. Jacola? We'll have to look it up. We had him on as a guest here, a specialist in bats. He said that the bat population, some of them, for some species, they're being driven to extinction by industrial wind turbines. And apparently what happens is, you say, the blood in their lungs, blood vessels burst, and they essentially drown in their own blood.
It's terrible. They really should be publicizing this more when
well, it's interesting.
See all these bats, all these birds dying.
Yeah, interesting, Mary Jean. Apparently, for many of the large industrial wind turbine farms, as they call them, which they're not really farms, of course, at all, they very carefully, before dawn, they run around and pick up all the dead bird and bat carcasses so that when tourists come around to see these green energy, environmentally friendly wind turbines, they don't see all the carcasses of the birds all over, which I think is,
exactly.
You could almost see having an editorial cartoon about that. Get those birds out of here. We got tourists coming. This is green energy, remember?
Yes. It's the image of green energy, not really green energy.
That's right, like 1984, right out of 1984. Now, Bob Carter, who was our previous chief science advisor for International Climate Science Coalition, here's what he said. And by the way, he still would be. He's very good, but he passed away, unfortunately. The American Bird Conservancy estimates that by 2030, well over 1 million birds, including endangered species such as eagles and hawks, will be killed in the United States by wind turbines. Okay, this doesn't sound very good. Jesus, Murphy.
No, definitely not.
Yeah. Now, how does that compare with other fatality statistics for birds and bats?
Well, the death by wind turbines certainly overwhelms all the other ones. So birds and bats can die from various causes, such as colliding with communication towers, power lines, windows, and of course cats hunting them. But their death by wind turbines is much greater than all of those combined.
Is that right? Wow.
And of course, new wind turbines are being built all across the country and other countries in the world. And so this is only going to increase.
Well, I was reading a statistic the other day that there's apparently something like 300,000 industrial wind turbines around the world. And again, these are things that are twice as high as the Peace Tower, typically 60 stories high. And yet, how much do you think, it's interesting because before they built these turbines, about 80% of the world's energy came from fossil fuels. And so now after building 300,000 turbines, what fraction of the world's energy do you think comes from fossil fuels?
Probably most of it.
Well, it's just the same. It hasn't changed. It hasn't changed. It hasn't changed because, obviously when you build these turbines, what do you do when it's not windy?
They're going to need some backup, and that'll be fossil fuels.
Yeah.
So you're not really getting rid of fossil fuels entirely, even when you do build the wind turbines.
And what fossil fuel would you recommend that they use? Okay, it's got to be something that's got to respond quickly, like natural gas.
Oh, yeah, natural gas.
Yeah, to spin up. That's right. We got to have something that spins up quickly. Oh, my God, the wind's gone down. We need something quickly. So you can't have coal because that takes a while to get going. You can't have nuclear because that is really a base load, steady energy source. You need something that can go up and down, up and down, up and down with the wind. And, of course, if you have a car driving up and down the road at 1 mile an hour, 60 miles an hour, 100 miles an hour, 2 miles an hour, 8 miles an hour, you have terrible gas consumption, right?
Yes, exactly. You'd be better off just using fully natural gas in the first place.
Yeah, well put indeed. Now, it's interesting because another environmental impact of the wind power, industrial wind turbines, is the materials that are used. We did talk a little about the impact on human rights. Okay, we spoke about that earlier, about the 40,000 children that are mining, to pull out these rare earth elements in dangerous areas. But there's a movie called Planet of the Humans. Have you heard of that film?
Yes, I haven't watched it yet, but it's on my to-watch list.
Okay, well, everybody should check it out. It was released on Earth Day of this year by film producer Michael Moore. And it's interesting because Michael Moore is a so-called progressive, which I always think is a little regressive, but regardless, this is a left-winger who says that the environmental movement have had the wool pulled over their eyes, and the politicians have had the wool pulled over their eyes because the amount of damage done to the environment, to the overall Earth's biosystems, when vast regions are converted into wind and solar power plants, it's just amazing. And it's interesting because the U.S. National Renewable Energy Laboratory scientist, Walter Musial, he explained, and this sounds pretty good at first glance, to have a wind farm large enough to power Long Island in New York State would take an area half the size of Long Island. So he says putting it offshore makes a lot of sense. But is there another problem?
Yes, I mean, all the creatures in the oceans, the whale populations, it's going to have a huge impact on them.
Yes, exactly. Well, there's been a number of findings.
Yes, and also the cost of installing them offshore is going to be a lot.
Yeah. Well, apparently during the construction of the wind turbines in the offshore facilities, when they have pile driving, bam, 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 into the floor of the ocean, apparently that can deafen whales for kilometers away. And they say that when the infrasound is being generated from the turbines, it actually does affect under the water, is what I understand, because they actually found cases of whales who were beached in southern England who were somehow diverted from their normal migration path by all the turbines off the coast. So, yeah, there's anything but environmentally friendly. So if you don't care about the damage and the threat to whale populations, sure, put it offshore. But don't tell us it's environmentally friendly. And the other factor is this. When you count the enormous volume of materials that are used to actually make the turbines, is that problematic, do you think?
Yes, for sure. There's a lot of rare earth metals that need to be extracted to make the wind turbines. And also, there's a huge amount of earth and rock blasted with thousands of pounds of dynamite to receive only a small amount of rare earth metals. And this, like we said before, is usually produced in terrible environmental conditions in China or other developing countries.
Well, Michael Moore, he has a 2-minute clip, and I'll put it under this podcast because it's really interesting. In 2 minutes, with exciting music and all kinds of graphics and everything else, he shows how open pit mines gouge deep into the earth to extract iron, aluminum, copper, and other minerals. These are all the kinds of things that are needed to make the wind turbines. So it's not like they magically fall out of the sky as if David Suzuki, just says, abracadabra, here's a wind turbine. They not only that, but they actually have to be made. And as you said, they're mostly made in China. And what's that in the background, that we see just kind of on the horizon, supposedly being closed down? What's really happening?
Well, you have the fossil fuel power plants, and this needs to be used as backup for when we don't have the wind turbines working due to lack of wind or other conditions.
Yeah. So you're not getting away from fossil fuels anyways.
No.
Not that I think we should. I mean, I think we should have proper pollution control. But I think the point is that industrial wind turbines are filthy in the way they're made. And of course, the primary energy source in places like China, who provides enormous volumes of solar and wind power, their main energy source for this is coal. So at the bottom of your wind turbine, you could have made with coal. To what? To avoid burning coal? Like, that doesn't make any sense. So in fact, they're filthy when they're made. When they finally are put up, they're devastating for people nearby, for wildlife. You know, they're horrible. And you said, how long do they last again? I mean,
usually around 15 years, which is a lot less than the 30-year expected time.
Huh.
So they don't last for long at all.
So if Ottawa wants to have 710 turbines and they have a plan to 2050, they're going to have to take them all down before that 2050 date arrives, and they're going to have to recycle them. And apparently you can't recycle the blades. They're going to have to bury them. Not in my backyard, thank you. And then they're going to have to put up a whole lot more new ones because they just don't last very long.
Yes, exactly.
Sheesh. So bad for the environment, bad for humans. I mean, terrible for our electricity supply because they're variable up and down, and it doesn't do anything to reduce emissions really because you need to keep the fossil fuel stations going.
Right.
So, wow, I mean, this sounds like a bad deal all around. I mean, I can't imagine how they've gotten away with this. So would you say this is green energy?
No, definitely not green energy.
Gee. On that note, we're going to sign out. This is Tom Harris and my co-host Mary Jean Harris, the researcher for ICSC Canada, signing out from Exploratory Journeys. So tune in next week for another interesting episode of Exploratory Journeys.